Welcome to Real Talk, Real Wellness with Alicia. I'm Alicia, a context-led women's wellness practitioner, and this is where we get real about what it truly takes to feel well mentally, physically, and emotionally. International Women's Day always brings a certain energy for me. You see everywhere. There are the messages of appreciation, the images celebrating women's achievements, the flowers, the posts highlighting women's strengths, women's leadership, women's resilience, organizations releasing statements, campaigns appear, panels are organized. It's a moment where women are very visible, right? We are acknowledged, and that acknowledgement is not insignificant. All right, it's not insignificant. Women's contributions historically have often been overlooked and undervalued. So moments of recognition are highly appreciated, and they matter. But Women's International Women's Day, also invites a deeper question. Once the celebration is over, what structures actually exist to support women in the everyday reality of their lives? Recognition is one thing, right? Structural support is something else entirely. Over the last century, women have made extraordinary progress in many areas. Women now participate in higher education at rates that in many countries equal or even surpass men. Women are leading companies, entering professions that were historically close to them, influencing politics, shaping science, driving innovation, building businesses, and contributing intellectually across almost every field. In many parts of the world, women have gained legal rights that previous generations had to fight very, very hard to obtain. Rights around voting, education, employment, and financial independence. So it would be inaccurate to say nothing has changed. A great deal has changed. But progress does not mean the work is finished. If we step back and look at the wider structures surrounding women's lives, there are still clear areas where society has not fully caught up with the reality of women's experiences. One example is how work itself is structured. Most modern workplaces were built around models developed during the industrial periods when the typical worker was assumed to have someone else managing the domestic and caregiving responsibilities of life. That historical model assumed a worker who could be fully available to the workplace without interruptions. But today, many women are both participating in workforce and carrying significant caregiving responsibilities at the same time. Global data consistently shows that women still perform the majority of unpaid care. The United Nations estimates that women perform roughly 3 times as much unpaid care and domestic labor as men worldwide. That includes childcare, elder care, household organization, and the many invisible tasks that keep families functioning. So when we celebrate women's professional achievements on International Women's Day, we also have to acknowledge that many of those achievements are happening alongside a secondary layer of labor that remains largely invisible within the economic system. That, my dears, is a structural problem. It's a structural issue. Another structural issue involves healthcare and medical research. For many years, medical research historically centered male physiology as the default model for human health. Women's hormonal cycles, reproductive health, and biological differences were often underrepresented in clinical research. In recent years, this has begun to change, but the gap still exists in many areas of research and medical understanding. Women's bodies are not simply small versions of male bodies. I hope we know that by now. Biology matters, hormonal cycles matter, reproductive health matters, life stages such as pregnancy, postpartum recovery, perimenopause, menopause, all shape women's health in ways that require specific research and medical attention. Recognizing those biological realities is not about limiting women. It's about designing systems that actually reflect how women's bodies function. And this is where an important point enters this conversation. Equality should not mean pretending women are identical to men. Women are not a variation of men. Women are women. There are biological differences, life experiences, social realities that shape women's needs in distinct ways. When systems ignore those realities, women are often forced to adapt themselves to structures that were never designed with them in mind. Sometimes that adaptation looks like women pushing themselves to operate inside systems that do not recognize pregnancy, menstrual cycles, caregiving, responsibilities, hormonal health, or the broader rhythms of a woman's life. Other times, it looks like women absorbing additional work quietly so that structures do not have to change, But long-term well-being requires systems that acknowledge the realities rather than ignore them. So, International Women's Day raises a useful question for society's collective. All right? And that is, what kind of world are we actually building around women? Are we building workplaces that recognize caregiving responsibilities? Are we building healthcare systems that take women's biology seriously? Are we designing policies that recognize the economic value of care work? Are we creating professional environments where women's leadership is genuinely supported rather than symbolically celebrated? Those questions are not about criticism for its own sake. They are about progress. Societies evolve by examining their structures honestly. And one of the most important shifts in recent decades has been recognizing that women's well-being is not simply a private matter, it's a structural matter. When women are well supported, families function more smoothly, communities become more stable, economies become stronger, children benefit, workplace benefits, social cohesion benefits. Women's well-being is not a niche issue, it's a foundational to how society functions. That's why International Women's Day should not only be a moment of celebration, it should also be a moment of reflection. Where have we made real progress? Where do the structures still need to evolve? And how do we move from symbolic recognition towards practical support? For me personally, that question sits at the heart of the work that I do in women's wellness, because if women are going to feel well mentally, physically, and emotionally, the systems around them have to make sense for women's lives. Part of my contribution to this conversation is context-led women's wellness model. It is a structured approach that supports women one-to-one, step-by-step, at the woman's own pace. It recognizes that women's well-being cannot be rushed. It cannot be separated from realities of a woman's life. And alongside that, in Women in Wellness Collective exists to support another important layer of change. Many women are already working to support other women. They are practitioners, coaches, therapists, facilitators, educators. They are trying to improve women's well-being within their communities and professional spaces. But the wellness industry itself also needs structure and standards, and therefore professional pathways. The Women in Wellness Collective is designed as a certification and professional framework for women working in wellness, so that women who support others are themselves well supported, well trained, and working within a thoughtful standards. Because meaningful change really happens through sort of isolated effort. It happens through systems. International Women's Day reminds us that women are already transformed many parts of society through persistence, intelligence, and collective efforts. But it also reminds us that structural work continues. Celebration is a moment, structure is long-term work. And if we are serious about women's well-being, that work is worth doing carefully. So, if this episode means anything to you, please share it. And until the next episode, stay thoughtful.